Hi, everyone. My story begins in winter of 1998 when I responded as part of a crew to a car fire. I was the pump operator, the engine driver, so I was street side when the crew took a hose line behind a building for extinguishment of an apparent car fire. As things began to unfold, I noticed that something just wasn't right about the call because the ambulance pulled out. I stepped up and I saw a badly burned body in the back of the ambulance with several paramedics back there, and my lieutenant was driving the ambulance to the hospital. And usually he would give direction, and he did not. He just had this straight ahead stare as he pulled away. A little bit later, the firefighter that was on the end of the hose line came up to me and told me that it was our colleague who had attempted suicide at this time. And then as things began to unfold, I was just in this daze, and I didn't know where I was at. Just walking around in a daze, couldn't finish or complete my job. And the chief arrived on scene, and probably about less than 10 minutes later, word was received that our colleague had died by suicide. At that point, I dropped to my knees and I was sobbing uncontrollably in on the front bumper of the engine. The chief then had me escorted back to the firehouse with a police officer. When I arrived there, everybody had already known that our friend was dead, and I just peeled my peeled my bunker gear off and just went and sat at a desk in the lieutenant's office. The guys were coming in there consoling me. Everybody was converging on a firehouse. This was, you know, tremendous help, this tremendous support that happened, yet we didn't really know how to deal with what was going on. Within a few hours, they had assembled a critical incident stress debriefing team that was part of our trauma center that was a few miles down the road from us, and it included nurses, doctors. They brought the firefighters together, anybody who wanted to be part of this, along with our dispatchers who took the call. After that, we were sent home and relieved from duty, replaced, and sent home. I arrived home about midnight, and I just couldn't sleep. Uh, I let Judy know what had happened, uh, but that was it. It was a lost night of sleep for me. Uh, the next few days after that, or next couple of days, we were just frantically scrambling. A lot of guys, especially younger guys, did not have the Class A formal dress uniforms for what was going to be the funeral in a few days. So I was busy with that. One of my other friends, he was not a lieutenant at the time, a fellow firefighter, brought me and one of the younger guys together, and we went out to breakfast. We were just trying to discuss things, trying to make sense out of all of this. And then a few days later, believe it or not, we were returned to duty. And things just kept on piling up. You think the death by suicide of a friend would be overwhelming enough. But before we went to his wake, which was on that same day when we returned to duty, we had to respond to a DOA, somebody that was dead on arrival. This individual was dead for a few days. We had a cardiac arrest later on, which did not have a good outcome. And then we responded to a patient who was always in chronic pain, and he was one of our regular patients. We always took him to the hospital, took care of him, attended to his needs. Well, his pain, this chronic pain he had, was unbearable, and he actually died by suicide. He took a bunch of pills. So we're overwhelmed by this, and then we have to go to the wake and then the funeral the next day, and we were left devastated. A friend of mine and I were in fire officer training at our local community college, and we were met with a lot of condolences from not only firefighters but just civilians who were taking this class preparing themselves for an eventual career in the fire service. Uh, One of our uh, instructors also knew our friend when he had worked on another department. He was his, I believe, his lieutenant at the time. And he allowed us, when it came to the subject matter of suicide, depression, he allowed me and my friend to talk for about 45 minutes. And we were just sobbing, telling our story, trying to make sense of it. Well, that made us feel a little bit better, but it really wasn't enough. As time went on, we heard stories about through the grapevine about different things and we became bitter. But I'm going to just stick to my story. As I became bitter, I became angry, resenting the department. They didn't do enough for him. But one of the things I always said to myself is they should be sending us to counseling. This is not enough. One critical and stress debriefing is not enough. But alas, it did not happen. That would be something that later on I'd have to take responsibility for myself. As years passed, my attitude became worse and worse and worse. I had this anger management issues, road rage, fights with colleagues, with uh, with family members, and it just was going on and on and on. And then around the year 2000, one of my colleagues came up to me. He wasn't on the call that day, but he came up to me and said, Tim, you used to be this uh, happy, uh, head full of steam, take no prisoners type of guy as far as doing the job. And now you're this angry, bitter guy. What happened? If you remember when I did my last blog talking about listening to the inner voice, even if it's inside or the outside, and I was listening to, I was not listening to my inner voice when it told me, talking about going to counseling, they should be sending us. Really, what the inner voice was telling me is that I should be taking responsibility and going to counseling. There, my opportunity when he asked me that question, because I was so enraged by what had happened, and little did I know this was undiagnosed PTSD, I could have opened up to him, spilled out everything that I was feeling, but it was just a lost opportunity. There were many times that I had over the next, we'll say 14 years after that, just continued behavior patterns. And I was in the chief's office more times than I could count for attitude adjustments. I'd come home and tell Judy, yeah, I was in there again. And the chief was saying, you got an attitude adjustment, you got to straighten up. And Judy always used to tell me, hey, your salary pays for the house, mine pays for the garage. You need to straighten out, buddy. And again, not listening to external cues or internal cues. It was just another lost opportunity. And I continued to struggle. Sleep became disrupted. I did move on, and I was transferred to a couple different crews. And eventually I made it to another crew. And then I just started delving into wanting to become a nationally registered paramedic, studying for the lieutenant's exam. And I did all these things, but all the while, never really dealt with the true grief, that survivor's guilt of not being able to, why didn't I see this? Why didn't see it coming? Well, several years had passed, and then I had an opportunity to talk to his parents, and they had said he had suffered with clinical depression from high school on, and they said they always knew that this day might come. So it gave a little bit of relief, but the anger management issues didn't go away. Now I'm just going to fast forward to 2014, like January of 2014, and had this big blowout with a colleague, uh, a fellow lieutenant, and it was a bad scene. I was in staff meetings and he's yelling at this guy, and even the chief said, "Hey," even I felt uncomfortable with all this, and it was at that point, something's going on here. Something's got to happen. And again, this is all just what I'll call the cliff notes of my story. There's a lot more in there, but not knowing that I had undiagnosed PTSD and we didn't have resources available at that time like peer support or somebody willing to just sit me down and say, hey, you need to straighten up your act. Maybe you need to go to counseling. That's what I was waiting on and not taking responsibility for myself. So around, I'll say maybe February of 2014, there was this 8.5 by 11 piece of paper that was pinned to our training board. And that's what changed my life for the better and moved me towards my path of healing and redemption. In the next video, I will pick up from March of 2014 and move it forward to present day on how his death shaped my path and my mission moving forward in my life. So take care, be well, and until next time, namaste.